Welcome, everyone. This is Captain Dan Blanchard of UnCruise Adventures, and you're here today for No Ordinary Adventure, my podcast. And today I have the pleasure and honor, I will say, of having Trudi on board with me. And Trudi and I ran across each other's paths many years ago in Baja California Sur. And Trudi has been an integral part of Loreto for many years now. And she was even the one that originally led me down the path of finding a family in a far off location that we still work with in Baja California Sur, and who we just enjoy having being part of. And Trudi is a local down in Loreto and is someone I just honor and feel so strongly about. And we've worked together on different projects over the years and look forward to working together in the future again. So, Trudi, welcome.
Thank you. Very, very nice to be on the podcast with you. This is great.
Yeah, it is. It's good to be here for me too. And I think I was recalling back of times I've stumbled across you in Loreto when I kind of came down last minute, and times we had planned meetings. This goes way back. And I'm just excited for what has happened with you and your business over the years, and all the impact that you have on locals that are, eking out and making successful tourism businesses. And it seems like everything you touch just turns to gold from what I can recall. So maybe we'll just start with, how did this all happen? How did you get to be running Saddling South and your whole operation? And I mean, it's a big thing in my mind.
It is a pretty big thing when I think about all the things that have come about because of whatever synchronicities or, following the path of the universe and getting on the trail with cowboys. And well, my first steps into Baja California Sur were and so I was 20 years old. I signed up for a National Outdoor Leadership School kayaking course. Back then, it had only been, their Baja courses had only been running for about 6 years. So I had the great opportunity to work with a man named, or to be part of that first, or actually one of his last teaching possibilities there in Mulahey in Conception Bay, in Coyote Bay, where the original National Outdoor Leadership School started up in the early 70s. And then Tap Tapley, who's an amazing mountaineer, was an amazing skier, was in Alaska for a while in his 20s when he was with the 10th Mountain Division. And just an all-round outdoors guy and wonderful teacher. One of those strong, silent, you just listen to him and you pay attention to him and you pay attention to his manner of being in the wilderness. And you learn a lot just from watching and listening. So I had the great opportunity to be one of his last students while he was still teaching for National Outdoor Leadership School. He went on to do work with Outward Bound as well. But we were great friends still for over 40 years. He passed away a few years ago, but great friends. And he was a great inspiration for me. Coming out of that was just, for me, the love of Baja California Sur. So I flew down to Mulahey in 1976, not knowing it would be the rest of my life here. But I loved, more so than the paddling adventure, kayaks were a way to get there. I wasn't a big sporty kind of a person. But to get into a kayak and go to each beach that we went to and to snorkel everywhere and to meet the people along the coastline. And even back then I had a bit of Spanish, but then pretty soon I went to Spanish language school, and then just being here for almost 50 years now.
How can that happen?
Yeah,
How can that happen?
How did that happen?
We can't be that. We started when we were 4 or 5 down there, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Actually, I was 10 when I went to.
Okay. You were a lake.
Yeah. So, but anyway, it was just the beginning of a whole new lifestyle for me. I went back to Calistoga, California, where I was born and raised, and where I had horses when I was a teenager, leading into the next part of my life down here. But I had such a wonderful outdoor experience down here that I went home, bought a folding kayak, came back down and worked for the school, became basically what I called myself a Baja beach bum for a number of years. But then, sea kayaking as adventure travel and Baja as a destination kind of came together in the early 80s. And I was in the right place at the right time. I already knew the coastline. I gathered a couple kayaks and thus began paddling south, which went on for 35 years. I sold that company when I saw that I was becoming way more involved with the mule packing trips down here, which became known as and still known as saddling south.
I love that you managed to use both activities on this with the same similar name, paddling south and then, saddling south, which just sounds so good. But I'd like to reflect for a moment on NOLS. We now the National Outdoor Leadership. And, you were there really just right on the cutting edge of when NOLS really started taking off. And I remember, in the late 70s as a young man hearing about NOLS for the first time. And of course, today, as I look across our expedition staff and many of the folks that work with UnCruise, NOLS is a major factor in their quest to being an adventure company. And I would guess 60% of our expedition staff have been through NOLS training over the years. And I think that's a tribute to not only its founding, but the startup it had with you in Baja California. It's really, I think, affected our world as a whole in a very positive way.
Yes, I still very much feel very supportive of that school and the training that they do and just how being in the outdoors safely, well prepared, learning how to do that because it's definitely a leadership course rather than a go out and survival kind of a thing. And so in that respect, you learn how to work with a group, you learn group dynamics, you learn, everything you need to do to be safe in the outdoors. And the Wilderness Medicine Institute is now part of their system as well, and do great training courses for up to all wilderness first responder and EMT courses as well.
Yeah, it's really turned into quite the full package. And I will say that it's also the graduates of NOLS who then put this into practice in outdoor activities and this type of thing have also been some of the biggest advocates in working with local and federal governments around the world to protect areas as well and bring in reasonable regulations to not allow it to keep it from being overcrowded and this kind of thing. So I think the NOLS can bring so much to the table for a young person as they churn, well, don't even have to be young, but to someone that's starting in the industry and really wants to make a difference in how they view the outdoors and the leadership portion. And that leadership, I believe, turns into leadership that's pointed towards keeping the outdoors, which is a great thing too.
Yeah, you'll enjoy this, having been up and down the coastline of the peninsula here and kind of way out in the wilderness, somewhere between Agua Verde and, say, Punta Coyote and Punta Mechudo. As you well know, it's beautiful, pristine beaches along there that the UnCruise route goes on, and it's really wonderful. And one year, as one of the NGOs down here got some paperwork going to help with the protection of this coastline, and they came to us as outfitters and said, "Well, what would you like to see? What would you like to have us do to help you in the management of this coastline? Would you like to see some palapas on some of the beaches so that you have shade? Would you like to see, whatever?" We said, nothing, like it is. That's what we love about the coastline here, is you can get to some very pristine places that are not touched by man, by any organization that feels like they have to make it better.
That is so true. And I feel this is where I think the kinship with what has happened in Baja California, and I would say north as well. But what has happened in the Californias and what has happened in our portion of Alaska, where I live in Southeast Alaska, has been very similar in that, back in the 70s, things were not always maybe what you and I would hope for. So for instance, back in the 70s and early 80s, there was development happening, but there was also just not the care for
Mhm.
keeping pollution in check. And, we used to go on the beaches, and part of our big task was just cleaning up the beaches back in the day. But today, it has gone so far forward inside the whole Gulf of California, Baja Peninsula, as far as, we go to beaches today and we land on them, and it's like we don't carry many gunny sacks of garbage off the beach anymore. It's actually very little that we take off because it's so much cleaner. And that's because of the influence of people like yourself that have said, hey, we don't want development. Just give us wild nature. And and certainly the biosphere islands and Loreto Marine Park near you and the mainland shoreline is just amazingly better than it was 40 years ago.
Yeah, very, very luckily, there are some really good organizations who are working with the schools down here and, helping with the concept of the children who will then hopefully teach their parents as well.
Well, I'm kind of curious, as you look back at your many years, I have to say I followed you. I think my first time down was in 80, and I really started working more diligently in about 86 in Baja, but south of where you're at. But I'm really curious from your standpoint, what are some of the great experiences you've had in exploring the region by kayak or mule? What were kind of like some of the, oh wow, like this is what changed my life type of thing?
Entre tantos, as they say, so many things. Gosh, I would say, I've done some long, long trips. So I've done some long trips by kayak and I've done some really long trips by muleback. And I think those are probably some of my favorite experiences when we've gotten out there for weeks at a time, when you really get to soak up the the wilderness aspect. Or in the ranches, for instance, I would say all of my recent endeavors to go out on mules as much as possible throughout the peninsula probably was even more life-changing than the kayak. After a while, you do the same route, the same route, the same route. And so when I got on a mule back in the early 80s, Tim Means from Baja Expeditions, and Tim was a wonderful promoter of so much of this down here and so much of the conservation effort and everything. But he and Nora, his wife, who raised their children were like 4 years old and a year and a half old when we went out and did a 9-day mule pack trip up in the Sierra de San Francisco, up in the northern part of the southern state, which is where we are, Baja California, Sur or South. And so I got on a mule down here in Baja with Tim and Nora and half a dozen other friends of theirs. And that was a life-changing thing for me. That was when I said, oh, I want to be a cowgirl. So I basically ended up, having other people partners become partners, local partners in the sea kayaking part of my life. And I took off for the hills and I went out and bought a mule and in the same way I kind of went back to Calistoga, bought a kayak, came down, did some. So
Yes.
there's a pattern here, isn't there? I wonder what my next thing will be. But when I got on that mule and went off into the mountains with the cowboys, I met these amazing ranch people, and they're so skilled at living in the backcountry because that's what they've done prior to the road being put in. There were these, pack trains and the way that some people still travel down there are to get to the store, they have to pack a donkey and ride for 3 or 4 hours just to get out to a little village or the store. And we love going to those areas because it's still so pristine. But I'd say getting on that mule for the first time on the peninsula led me into a whole different realm of the history and the backcountry and the wonderful old California lifestyle of people who have the knowledge to live out in the backcountry. So it led
Wow.
to some other things, right? And my daughter and I and a couple other women back in 2013 and 2014 took off on mules from the rodeo grounds there. We saddled up, made a plan, and we did a pack trip from the tip of the peninsula to the border. And it
Oh
took
my.
8 riding days. And more than just doing a trip for ourselves on our own, this was kind of an honoring of a trip that had happened back in the 1960s. So 1963 and 1964, Andy Mailing from the Mailing Ranch up in northern Baja California did the same thing, although they just started from Tecate up in the north and ended in Cabo. If you can imagine what it would have been like back there, road areas. And the trails were much more used because so many more people lived in the backcountry and used those trails. So when we did it 50 years later, we had some excellent guides who took us, but definitely traveled on a lot of fading trails.
Mm,
And then a lot of those trails had become roads. So we got a little taste of everything as we were out for 3.5 months.
I am so jealous. I am so jealous. We refer to it oftentimes as the old Padre Trail as
Yeah.
well. And I think, I just so wish for time to be able to do that. Exactly what you did. That would be like one of the greatest things my heart could enjoy as a lover of California, Baja California. And I think that, the way you phrased that about kind of the old California way, the old California paths, that kind of thing is so true. One of my richest experiences, which I hold so dear, I think I was probably 10 years into my experiences in Baja, and I started reading about Los Dolores and the old mission. And I had, there's no road to it or anything like this. It's very tough to get to. And we started, exploring and finally found it. Here was this, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the mission was originally constructed in like 1592, and there's pieces of it still today in the middle of the wilderness, and there's still a spring there and a little bit of a very small amount of farming still going around it. And I think those are, the things that Baja California has to offer those that are really wanting to look and seek out this wild nature and these little specks of humanity that once existed there. And that trip that you took, did you guys go through Los Dolores on that trip?
We actually did.
Yeah.
Yeah. We came down the hill actually just to the south of there at Los Burros,
Yes.
having come down out of the little mountain villages that are up in there, and dropped down into Los Burros and went over the ridge. We didn't actually go to the mission, which I'm going to do a little correction here. That mission by Padre was actually built in the 700s or very early
Okay.
700s.
Yeah, my dates are probably way off. Yeah.
About 100 years, but yeah, it was a beautiful place. We used to paddle into there in the 70s, and then when we would do our sea kayak tours from Agua Verde down to La Paz and take 2 or 3 weeks to do that because you get windstorms, you get winded in. And so we had one lovely experience getting winded in at the Los Dolores beach when there were no houses there except for the old ranch house that's tucked back in behind those palms.
Yep.
Those date palm grove, and with that beautiful old garden. And so we would get water there. We might buy a goat from the family or get some goat cheese, and then we would hike back up in closer to where the spring starts. And the Alvarez family, Manuel and his wife, Maria Encinas, who now live in Los Burros. He passed away. She's still around, I think, and kicking. But we would go back and hang out with their family and sometimes overnight with them. And they'd give us a mat to sleep on in their dirt floored little kitchen. And we'd have chickens and pigs running through. But it was the most wonderful experience to go back there and just live with that family and get a sense of, you really did feel like you went back in time a couple of 100 years into that lifestyle. And so it was really, really a great experience. And then to go up to that waterfall and just explore
Oh,
around
gosh.
up there. And then there was a beautiful old trail that would zigzag up to the top that somebody had built. And it was all structured engineered with rocks and beautiful zigzag old trail that goes up to the top. And neighbors would walk down on the weekends. They would hike down and visit the family back up in the arroyo there. So yeah, just all of those experiences that has led to me feeling so fortunate that I've had a taste of that old California lifestyle. And I still love going back into the mountains and being with those families who are still living the remote lifestyle, of course, at this point.
It is so true. I think that, when I think about remote locations, and we've, as a company, have operated, in many, many destinations, and I've sailed the Pacific, and I still travel to remote areas of the world. But I think two of the most remote areas that we travel, one is Baja California, both north and south, and then Alaska. And so I'm oftentimes telling guests, I'm going, don't let Cabo fool you. It's not all like Cabo. And so I'm real curious about, here we experience even today the remoteness of much of Baja California. But I'm curious how you as a local in Loreto have been able to, kind of look at keeping Loreto as part of Baja, this sustainable tourism place, and not allow it to become Cabo Wabo. How has that all progressed for you, and how has Loreto hung on to it's just, I think, very quaint, lovely town feel, even as the major city in that part of Baja California? How has that happened over the years? How have you managed to keep it so sweet?
Well, that wasn't me really, but in part, yes, I can claim a little bit of that because of the aspect of eco. Ever since the 80s, I was invited to go and expound at local meetings, for instance, with the government meetings or something, to talk about what ecotourism really means. And so, in a small way, I feel like I've had some impact. In a larger way, it's everybody else, like you, like UnCruise, like people who come in and want to know more about the history and the background are also appreciative of it. So more and more people have seen that the location, the wind, the weather, the a little bit colder aspect in the middle of winter doesn't lend itself to the Cabo feel. So you're below the Tropic of Cancer when you're in Cabo San Lucas, and anything above that, you start getting a little colder, a little colder, a little windier, and so I think its own weather and its own sense is protecting itself. And with that, I'll tell you a funny story. There was a girlfriend of mine who lives up in San Javier, the little village west of us in the mountain, beautiful, pristine, one of the first Jesuit missions on the El Camino Real.
Beautiful. Yeah.
On the western coast, El Camino Real. So up in that village, I think a big name someone came to town, Mexican person, who wanted to impress friends and family. And so he wanted to put on this big, huge display up in the village of San Javier. They had tables, they had elegant tableware put out. They had the local people cook up something, probably goat stew or cow or, something, a big local meal there. And suddenly, San Javier said, no way, this isn't going to happen here. He was looking at development. He was looking at a different kind of development than what really is appropriate for that area as far as my point of view. And the winds picked up. It blew like crazy just as they were about to sit down. I mean, you'd think this was an urban legend or something, but it was true. The wind picked up and it blew everything everywhere, and it blew out their whole plan for having this elegant meal in the middle of this quaint little village up in the mountains. So it didn't happen. We're like, oh no. And everybody else was kind of going, that was
I
San Javier did that.
love that. Well, I had the chance to be up there. Liz and Megan and I went up. I think it was just over a year ago. We had a chance to go up and revisit. I was so happy to see that it hadn't developed and that it was still just the locals right from the village that had local wares and gifts and this kind of thing that you could purchase and some really great food, I will say. And I just loved that the mission, there has not been significant change in many
Mhm.
years up there. If anything, I think the locals are probably, the part of the economy there even more than they used to be, which is kind of nice to see.
Yeah. When folks in, say, the political realm here in the 80s did ask me, what do you think? Should we put hotels up in San Javier, pave the road? I said, no, no, no. It makes it even more special when it's a dirt road. And even the locals didn't really want to have that paved road. They were afraid people would start driving more quickly and they would get different kinds of people in their village. But the government paved it anyway, and they got electricity. And I'll tell you, my truck loves it that they paved the road. I would tell these police that no, let the people are all about hospitality and engaging and communication. And you get that sense when you go up there. And so let the people do their own, help the people organize something like their own little hostels and their own, guest houses and things like that. It didn't quite go that way, but it has a little bit. There are a few small little places up there that people can go up and overnight. And, so it's true. It really hasn't developed in a big way. And that's a very good thing in my book.
I concur, and it's so happy to see it. I think again, most people they're familiar with Cabo, and it's so refreshing to know that you don't have to get very far out of Cabo. And I think the true California comes alive, and the peacefulness and the genuine, that just the people are so genuinely heartfelt, genuine, generous people.
Mhm.
I just love traveling outside the hubbub of it all, which kind of reminds me, you were talking earlier about going up into the mountains, and that is another area of Baja California that is really unknown to most. I mean, it's most people have no realization that there are pine trees and there are rivers that flow that you can jump in
Yeah.
certain spots, and that this very arid desert has this beautiful mountain range that is just, in my opinion, over the top. And I just loved your story about that.
Yeah, when we do the tours especially into the rock art areas up in the northern part of Baja Sur, people really come away. A lot of people sign up for those tours that we do and say, we want to go see rock art. We want to go see rock art. We've heard about this World Heritage rock art. And then they come back from the trip and they go, oh, the cowboys, the mules, the trails, the beautiful scenery. Oh, and we saw rock art too. They come back with such a wealth of knowledge, information, just all of this a wonderful feeling of the interaction with the local people. We just had our first trip into the Sierra de San Francisco finish yesterday, and I can't wait to get word back from the woman who's coming down on a bus right now to Loreto, and I'll see her this evening to find out how it was for her, because the guides up there who I spoke to last night said it was such an amazing feeling of family. And so our guide, Joel, who actually is one of the new owners of Saddling South. So I have professed that I am retiring, but, busman's holiday. My plan is to get on a mule and ride 1,000 miles again, so in the spring. But we'll get back to that. So Joel came out of the mountains, and one of the things we did, because we just had one client, but we wanted to honor her, her travel and all of that. It was too hot down here for a little while. Then it cooled down basically the day the trip started. And so this one woman went up, and I thought, well, it would be nice for her to have another woman along on the trip. I don't have time to go. But over the past year, we've been training. We've been paying, Saddling South has paid for English lessons for a young woman who lives at a ranch whom I've known since before she was born. And she's now 16. And for a year, she's been studying English online because she lives on a remote ranch, but they do have a little cell, or a little tower thing for internet. And so we sent Asus out on the trip with her. And Susan, the guest on the trip, was thrilled that we had that consciousness that she would probably like to have another woman along. And then also thrilled with the fact that this young woman who grew up on a roadless ranch was so competent and so wonderful and so willing to speak in Spanish with her. And also Susan spoke in English with her, and just this whole interaction. And so I'm already getting word back from Joel, the new owner, and Christine, who was his wife, who was the director of California Rock Art Foundation for about 9 years. And so they stepped into the role as the new owners for Saddling South. And for me, that was perfect. Christine has all those skills for answering the questions, and Joel just loves it out there. So that's those are the people I wanted to find who could take the reins, basically, and continue on the Saddling South name.
Yeah, basically and literally take the rein.
Yes.
Well, talk about, learning the English language to be able to put that to use with Saddling South. And kudos to you. The fact that your goal is to do another big trip coming up just speaks to your heart and soul. I will say I'm going to be on our first trip this year. And so I'm going to be traveling down to San Jose, and we'll be staying there a week prior, just kind of having a little bit of time myself, but then hop on the boat and I'll get in touch with you. And I definitely would love to meet Joel when we're in Loreto, if things permit. And perhaps we can relive some new things from the past. In other words, bring them to today and share the love of it all with Joel. I would just love that opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. And we also have Charo, who's been working with me for many years. He lives here in Loreto. And actually, it was my daughter's idea. My daughter, Olivia, has been guiding for the past few years as well. Not full time, but much of the time. And she is excellent. And I wish she would take over, but she wants to go on to school to be a veterinarian. And so she's done her part. And she was the one who said, Mom, we need to get some of these young women on the guide role up in the Sierra San Francisco. So let's start teaching them English, and then they'll have cooking and the ability to pack a donkey. And so that's going to be way more than those guys have. So,
that is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, like you, I have a daughter, Danae, who used to work down in Baja all the time when we had the Safari Quest down there. She's now the captain of the Safari Quest, and I have a son who runs a maritime school here in Seattle, but I haven't found either one of them want to take over the business. So I'm right with you, and I understand that. Well, it's going to be really fun to connect, and I'll shoot you an email when I'm going to be down. But I think, as you're aware, we are connected with the Romero family in Agua Verde, where our guests get a little primer of what you do, which is, we have a chance to go out with the rancheros on a short mule ride through the arroyos and such. But I think that, for any of my guests that are listening to this podcast, there might be one or two. I'm not sure. I'm being sarcastic, of course. There's more than one or two. There's five. But the Saddling South is really such a great thing for those guests who are traveling with UnCruise to be able to, really round out their full Baja experience. To be able to do a Saddling South trip pre or post would just be like, ooh la la in my mind. And so if they were to do that, how would they reach you or Joel to set something up?
Great. Well, there's the saddlingsouth.com website is still up and running, as it has been for 30 years or so. And so you can go on to saddlingsouth.com and then just there's a reservation form and there's a question. Email us for more information. And there you can also look at the different itineraries that we do. Some of it involved more with the cultural aspect, like up in the Sierra de la Giganta to the west of us. And some of it more involved with the rock art location to the north up by San Ignacio. And so that's one lane. The other, my email direct is tourloreto@l.com. That's how long I've had that, or more. And so Loreto at AOL.com. And so I'm still answering some of the emails, or if people, I'm helping Christine field some of the questions that she hasn't quite had the experience with yet. And yeah, I'm still doing as much promo for the Saddling South tours to help it be successful. And in a big way, it's because we want our vaquero friends and families to continue on. In fact, I think the cowboys almost cried last spring when Olivia was starting to tell them, well, you know what, mom's thinking of retiring now. And they're like, oh no, what are we going to do? Since we do kind of bring a lot of income and economy to the area, especially in the rock art area. But yeah, because I still dream to keep Charo busy here out of Loreto running the day tours. And then Christine and Joel are taking over the multi-day tours, especially with the rock art facet of it. And yeah, we're going to keep going. And like I say about the Romero family and being able to get on one of those mules that the father of the family, Alejo Romero, who's my very first trail guide in Baja California Sur back in the mid-'80s. He has been a gem, as you know. And just to get on, in fact, Alejo could take you for about 8 days. Oh, that's all it would take. If you rode with Alejo, it would take you about a week to get up and down the coastline if you would like to go see the old Padre Guillen trail there. But if you just want to do a day trip, boy, it's kind of a feather in my sombrero myself to know that connection was made many, many years ago to connect the Romero family with UnCruise, which was back then. It was
American Safari.
American Safari.
Yeah, it was. I think, I can't remember the exact year, but it was early on, and found you and you connected us with the Romeros, and that relationship has gone through good and tough times that we've all experienced in our world.
Yeah.
And I had a chance to see Alejo last spring, and he was just recovering and his health was coming back from an accident, and he was looking quite good. It brought me a lot of joy to see him back down at the beach there.
Yeah, so if you get a chance to go on a ride on one of those day rides off of the UnCruise ship, say hello to the mules for me. There's Pochi. Anyway, I know all their names. Have been wonderfully riding some of those mules. As far as I'm concerned, Alejo has done the best job in all of Baja California Sur of having the most wonderful, stable, calm set of riding animals on the whole peninsula. And I'm so glad it's worked out for both UnCruise and the Romero family to still have that connection and give people a taste of that old Baja.
Yeah, it's really true. And I just encourage folks that really want to take the cover, take the drapes and pull them back on what their perception of Baja California is. It can be done so easily through Saddling South. And like I say, have that chance with the Romeros to kind of have a startup experience. For those of you that are kind of a more adventuresome soul, this is just the perfect opportunity to not only see the land for what it is, and which is extraordinary beauty, but I think to really go deeper into the culture of the people of Baja. And Trudi, you've done such a wonderful job of presenting that over the years to where guests can experience something that is extraordinary in my mind. That is something that you sit back and in 40 years, you're going to hold your spouse's hand or your kid's hands, and you're going to remember what we had when we went to Baja Sur on the mules. Do you remember that? And it's one of the most, I'm getting a little teary eyed just thinking about it. Well, Baja has been so instrumental both on the water and the sea and on the land, the terra firma, for me as an individual to kind of realize that, wow, there are places like Alaska are just as they are culturally strong in the land, just stunningly beautiful. And these are the things as a traveler, as someone who wants to experience life, that I think is just incredible. And I'm so glad that you've been a huge part in preserving that and letting it have a life going on now with Joel and others. And it's so cool to hear about the young 16-year-old that's getting the English lessons. Oh, that's just perfect.
Well,
But
I'm going to pat you on the back too, because I must say I would never go on a big cruise ship. So that's me. But I loved going on the UnCruise Alaska trip that we did a number of years ago. And I must say the guides and your team, your crew on the ship was amazing. I've known a lot of guides in my life, and your guides were like primo. Was just blown away. So I've met a few of them as they've come down here. A couple have come down and ridden some mules with me and gotten a little more experience. And so I must say, getting with UnCruise, you can really get a sense of a place really a lot deeper than like you're obviously feeling. And then, I wanted to say one more thing, that if there's somebody who doesn't want to ride a mule or just doesn't see that as part of their kind of lifestyle, I opened a little museum in Loreto. And so we've continued on with the Caballo Blanco English bookstore with some Spanish books as well. We just opened that last year, kept keeping it going from a couple who had it for 20 years here. But then I found this beautiful perfect little place that looked like it could be a little cultural museum. So we cleaned it up and painted it and put on a palapa. And it's just a block, basically a block and a half off the main plaza in Loreto. And it's the perfect little location. And I have the old style vaquera saddle. I have a lot of old gear in there from some of my old cowboy guides, and also from Dario, the protagonist in the movie we made. And we'll say a minute about that too. But here in Loreto, to be able to keep the sense of history and keep the sense of honoring the unique old California history that is Loreto and is the Baja California Peninsula. We were the first California.
yeah.
The other California up there is like Alta California. So anyway, just on that. And as people come in the door of our little museum where we sell fresh roasted coffee as if it was made on a ranch and stuff. But people come in the door of the museum, and if they have any interest at all in history and real cultural history, they can see it in the little museum that we've put together. So it would be a good addition to the part of the walking tour if people stay on in Loreto. And I'm starting to advertise a bit more. It's going to start tomorrow.
Well, that is something I'm going to partake in. I can assure you when I arrive on January 23rd or 24th, whatever day it is.
It might be more likely that I might be on a mule and we might see each other down on the coastline south of Agua Verde somewhere. We'll have to keep in touch. I'll have a satellite phone, so we'll keep in touch. But
that would be off the shelf. Oh my gosh.
Maybe around Puerto Gato or somewhere.
Yes.
Or so.
Oh, wouldn't that be just outrageous? I mean, I know those are really tough things to plan because everything depends on weather and timing. But I'm going to be thinking real positive towards that, Trudi. That would be awesome.
Thank universe and synchronizing stuff in here.
Well, thank you so much. It is so good to talk with you. It just it gets my soul just burning to get down there. I just as we're talking, I'm now looking at January 20th, like, oh, I can't wait to get on board the boat and head north. And you help keep that fire and that spark going. So thank you for all you've done. And I'll leave the final word to you, and then I'll close out. But we'll be in touch.
Okay, thank you so much. Muchas gracias. Bienvenidos a la California Original.
Well, thank you, Trudy. That's beautiful. And this is Captain Dan Blanchard for No Ordinary Adventure, my podcast, saying adios for now. And we will connect and share the love of Baja California soon. Thank
Okay.
you.
See you down the trail.
Aye, aye.